As we age, our appearances as well as bodies lose vitality, but many people refuse to admit it. The following story occurred in a small northern city, and the main character was a widow named Sun. Despite the fact that her husband died at a young age, Sun remained very strong. She had worked very hard to support her family and always wished to see her 2 children grow up. However, Sun was very lonely as her 2 children married and had their own families. They were also busy with work and had little time to visit her. They also rarely brought their children to visit her, though they frequently sent her money, which couldn't compensate for the void in her heart. Sun had also tried playing cards and traveling with a few close friends like everyone else, but this wasn't what she truly desired. Sun went out shopping today. She was walking down the street when she noticed a very familiar young man walking in front of her. She took a quick step forward and turned her head to look, finally catching a glimpse of his face. This person resembled her late husband. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the strange man who looked exactly like her husband, so she quietly followed behind him. Sun inquired of a student standing in front of the school gate whether he attended the same school as the other young man.
"Yes, that's Kai, the best student in our school."
When Sun knew that the young man's name was Kai, she fell in love with him at first sight. However, as Kai became aware of Sun's tracking, he decided to deviate from his usual daily route. When Sun no longer saw Kai walking down those streets, she knew he'd realized he was being followed. Sun sighed every time she looked in the mirror at her wrinkled face, convinced that she was aging rapidly. Sun brought a sad mood that day. After eating, she went for a walk, unexpectedly bumping into Kai, making her feel a little embarrassed. Sun walked away quickly, thinking of the meeting just now. Her heart felt both happy and sad, mixed and intertwined. Sun ran fast for a long distance because she was still embarrassed. Kai was nowhere to be found when she turned her head to look back. Sun was still looking in his direction with a disappointed expression on her face when she turned her head and noticed a strange man standing right next to her. As if he could see through Sun's mind, this man asked her if she wanted to enter an official relationship with a person she secretly loved. When she noticed the strange man saying strange things, she tried to walk away, but was stopped by him. He wanted her to listen to what he was about to say. The man then took out a small bottle and handed it to Sun, explaining that it was called youth glue, and that simply applying it to her face would restore her youthful appearance. As if by magic, Sun subconsciously took the small bottle of youth glue. But then Sun appeared to awaken. She reacted as if she wanted to refuse, but the man had vanished. Sun wanted to throw away the strange little bottle, but she reconsidered. If this thing could truly restore her youth, she would give it a shot. When she got home, she anxiously took out the bottle, which contained a substance that was no different from regular glue except for the stamp written youth glue. She felt cheated because she had never heard of anyone applying glue to their faces and making them look younger, like an 18-year-old girl. But when she thought of Kai, then of that mysterious man, it was as if she were possessed by a demon, and a voice in her head urged her to use this glue as soon as possible. Sun couldn't resist the temptation and applied glue to her face before going to bed. She used up the entire bottle of glue. Sun felt cool and relaxed after applying it to her face, and she promptly fell asleep. It was only early in the morning. Sun couldn't wait to get up and look in the mirror as soon as she opened her eyes. Sun was taken aback when she saw herself in the mirror for the first time. She became younger and had regained her youthful appearance.
Wow!
Sun happily went out after changing clothes, looking forward to meeting Kai to express her feelings, and everyone on the street looked at her admiringly, making her very happy. There had even been some young men who had asked for Sun's contact information, but she rejected them all. So she went to Kai's school every day to meet him. She successfully caught Kai's attention, and they gradually got to know each other. Then she and Kai became lovers, as she wished for. Kai's appearance reminded her of her late husband every single time they met. Today, the two of them were out on the street shopping when her phone rang. Sun took it out and saw that it was her son calling. Sun hurriedly ran to another location to answer the phone, and Kai noticed that she appeared to be hiding something. After Sun hung up the phone, Kai inquired about the conversation. When Sun looked at Kai, she realized she couldn't tell the truth, so she devised a way to avoid it. Though everything would be alright, but recently, her son and daughter had been calling Sun alternately, making it difficult for her to explain to Kai each time. It turned out that because her appearance had changed, she didn't dare to meet her children, so she always made excuses not to see them. Her children were worried about their mother but were busy with work, so they could only care for her by calling her via phone. However, Kai was suspicious due to recent frequent phone calls. But every time Sun tried to avoid his question, Kai clearly didn't believe it any longer. To assuage his suspicions, she intercepted her children's phone calls whenever she left the house and spent money hiring young people to perform as her friends. But it didn't last long. After 3 months, the wrinkles on her face reappeared, and one day when she woke up, she had the appearance of an elderly woman. Kai was now calling her frequently, but Sun was afraid to respond, not knowing how to face him. Sun walked around the streets and alleys every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of her lover from afar. Just as she was about to give up, the mysterious man who had given her a bottle of youth glue appeared. She shed tears of joy when she saw that man, but the mysterious man did not take the youth glue out to give it to her, but instead made a request to her. Sun paused when he told her she had to trade her life. Sun was told to think twice about it after the mysterious man explained it to her. Sun thought about Kai and her husband who died young, so she was unconcerned about the consequences and accepted to trade youth glue from the man. She then reverted to her youthful beauty and returned to Kai once more. The two then rekindled their beautiful love, dreaming of a sweet home. But it didn't take long. This time the glue's effect lasted only a month before it faded, even though she looked much older than the last time. When she looked at her old face, she realized that the mysterious man meant if she kept using the glue, she would really die one day. Finally, Sun, unable to resist the desire of youth and love, set out to find the mysterious man. But before that, when she happened to run into Kai on the street, her elderly appearance clearly failed to make Kai recognize that the old woman in front of him was his lover. Sun's heart was broken as she looked at Kai's back. This time, Sun could easily meet the mysterious man. He continued to give Sun a new youth glue bottle after Sun determined that she would continue to use glue. However, the glue's effect lasted only a week this time. Sun finished from Kai for the 3rd time a week later. Kai couldn't find her no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't until his son returned home that he discovered she had died. Sun's death appearance was strange. Her entire body transformed into a mummy, and she opened her mouth as if calling for something. Which would you choose? Health, youth, love, life, or family? The story I wanted to tell you this time was about my neighbor. His name was Lu Fang. However, we usually didn't get along well with him. One day, while my friend and I were walking on the street, my friend told me that Lu Fang was following us. I told him to ignore him and urged them to go faster, but we couldn't stand the smell of Lu Fang. No one wanted to play with him. Lu Fang's family condition was not very good. He looked a bit malnourished and his clothes were also very shabby. Although Lu Fang's house was next to mine, I didn't make friends with him for this reason. Lu Fang's house was full of paper people and paper horses all over the house. It looked so weird. In front of Lu Fang's house there was also a round wreath of flowers to invite business. It was not just Lu Fang who looked annoyed but also his mother. In the countryside at that time, almost every family kept a few chickens and pigs, and sometimes they could not avoid diseases and they would die. When pets die of disease, people often throw them in the river. When Lu Fang's mother saw someone dump an animal carcass, she would bring it home to clean it and eat it. We all guessed Lu Fang's strange body odor because of eating too many sick animals. His mother also rarely interacted with people in the village. She had a very odd temperament, so the family's paper business was not doing very well. Every time we see Lu Fang's mother, we shied away and couldn't figure out why we were so afraid of her. Once, I was walking home alone and passed in front of Lu Fang's house. I heard a commotion in his yard. If it was someone else's house, I might not care, but Lu Fang's house was different because I had never seen anyone visit his house. The noise from his yard intrigued me. I listened and wanted to go in and see. I tiptoed to Lu Fang's front door, put my ear to the door and listened to the movement in the courtyard. Beside Lu Fang's voice, I heard the voice of a girl in the yard. This thing piqued my curiosity even more. I mustered up my courage and was about to push the door open to see who was inside. I gently pushed open the door to reveal an opening and peered into the courtyard. I guessed it could be a sneaking relationship. I could feel my heart beating faster. Since the opening was not too big, I could only see a part of the courtyard. I saw Lu Fang playing ball with that girl very happily. I had rarely seen him smile so happily before. But no matter how I changed my perspective, I couldn't see the girl. The less I saw, the more worried I was because I didn't know if something shady happened here. As I was looking at the yard with my full attention, a hand suddenly was placed on my shoulder. The sudden hand almost scared the hell out of me. It was Lu Fang's mother. She yelled at me with fierce eyes and asked what I was doing in front of her house. I was so scared. Lu Fang's mother's screams made me tremble so much that my legs went limp. I sat down on the ground. Lu Fang's mother asked if I wanted to steal something from her house. She thought I was stealing things from her house, while Lu Fang's house was poor. There was nothing worth stealing. The moment she didn't notice, I immediately escaped. As I ran, I screamed in terror at what had just happened before my eyes. It was horrible. That night, I dreamt that Lu Fang's mother was chasing me. The next day after school, I told my friend about it. He laughed at me for being shy. I didn't want to let the story go. I asked my friend that night we would go to Lu Fang's house together to see which girl was playing with him. I didn't wait for my friend to agree or disagree, but I decided on this. I returned home to eat a hasty dinner, then ran to Lu Fang's door. I hid in the corner and stared at his house. My friend also came soon after. During the 2 hours we watched, no one entered Lu Fang's house. But when I was talking to my friend, there was a noise in Lu Fang's yard. I asked my friend if he could hear a girl's voice in the yard. My friend also listened carefully. In the yard, a girl was playing with Lu Fang. The two of them seemed to have had a lot of fun playing together. Their laughter seemed to tear the cold air. My friend suggested going inside to see who the girl was in the yard, but I disagreed. I was still afraid of being discovered by Lu Fang's fierce mother like yesterday. We hid in the corner and looked in. When it got dark, my friend got bored and wanted to leave. I stopped him. I waited patiently for a while and then I heard the sound of clack, 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 clack. Someone was opening the door. I saw a girl with a red face walking out of Lu Fang's house. We didn't know if the girl was from this village or not. because she looked strange. At first, I thought someone was visiting Lu Fang. Because we wanted to know what had happened, we followed her and tried to see who she would meet. My friend and I followed her out of the village when it was dark. The friend was a bit scared, so he didn't want to follow anymore and wanted to go home. I ignored him and continued to follow the girl. I knew it was getting dark and it was dangerous to go back to the village. He didn't dare to go back alone, so he could only go on with me. I also convinced him and we talked. He pointed forward and said that the girl had gone into the forest. I saw that the girl had left the road and entered a forest on the side of the road. My friend and I ran into the forest as fast as we could for fear of losing track of that girl, because if we lost track, it seemed like we wasted all night. But when we ran into the forest, the girl was gone. While I was about to find her, I suddenly panicked at the scene before me. I was so scared that I stepped back and bumped into my friend. He was also taken aback by my actions, his voice trembling as he asked me what was wrong. At that time, we also discovered that we were chasing the girl to the cemetery. My friend burst into tears and wanted to go home immediately. I felt awe at the scene in front of me too. Just as we were about to turn around and wanted to run back, we bumped into something behind us and made a noise. In the dark and silent graveyard, the sound almost made me pee my pants. This sight made my legs weak. I didn't know when a paperman figure was placed behind us. A paperman was standing in front of us. We reassured ourselves by assuming that the wind had blown this paperman here. My friend was so scared that he cried and turned to run home. I didn't dare to stay alone, so I followed him out of the cemetery. As I ran out of the graveyard, I looked at the paperman again. This paper person looked very similar to the girl who walked out of Lu Fang's house. After many times of fear, I did not dare to continue to find out who was playing with Lu Fang. Every time I passed his house, I could still hear the noise in the yard. I didn't have the guts to find it anymore. This story occurred in Yongchun Village, Jidong Province, Jixi City, Heilongjiang Province. In the village, there was a gambler named Kao. Despite being in his 30s, he had no family because he was a gambler. That day, Kao went out early in the morning, and his old blind mother knew he was gambling again, so she tried to advise her son to give up, find a soulmate, and then build a family in order to have a decent life. But he refused to be obedient to stay at home, instead rushing out the gate without even looking back, leaving the old mother sighing behind. After leaving the house, Kao went straight to Mr. Lee's house at the end of the village to the east, because Mr. Lee's family owned a gambling establishment in this village that was open all year round. As Kao approached Mr. Lee's front door, he became wary because there was a big man standing there, guarding the door for the casino. Despite his concerns, Kao gritted his teeth and approached him. He always looked down on Kao and had a hostile attitude whenever he saw Kao, because Kao craved to gamble while he even had no money. When he heard Kao said that he got rich, he didn't believe Kao because everyone knew Kao didn't have a job, his family was farmers, and he had no income at all. His predictions was correct, because Kao did not just come here to play cards, but rather to play cards with debt. When Kao asked, "Isn't this a place where you make money?" he replied, "You are such a jerk. The pig that your mother worked so hard to raise, you even took it out as collateral." Nonetheless, he opened the door and let Kao in. Kao entered the room. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and the sound of gamblers arguing made the scene here very lively. When the people at the mahjong table saw Kao walk in, they all came to a halt. considering that Carl wasn't allowed to play because he didn't have any money. So, when they saw Carl, they all said empathically, "If you don't have money, get out as soon as possible, otherwise everyone here will teach you a lesson." Carl said he would bet with the family's fat pig. He was confident, his face was somewhat smug, and Carl sat down at the mahjong table. Zing was the man in charge of this bet. After hearing Carl, he immediately summoned Carl to another table to write a loan bill. Zing claimed that mortgaging the pig at home would allow him to borrow 1,000 won. That man did a lot of this kind of thing, and the loan bill was written quickly, urging Carl to sign it, then giving him 1,000 won. Carl signed and returned the bill to Zing. Zing glanced at it a few times, and when he saw no problems, he allowed Carl to come to the table and began gambling. They were playing mahjong, and it quickly became clear. The rules were simple. Everyone got 2 cards, and the winner was considered on the number of points they received. Carl lost a few games in a row and started to be nervous. Since his opponent Zing was constantly winning cards, Carl had no chance of knowing that the other 2 people at the table were also Zing's people. It would be strange if Carl won. After a few rounds, Carl's 1,000 won of selling his pig left him with only 400 won in his hand. The more he played, the more he lost. Carl continued to play until the afternoon, and the remaining 400 won were also lost. When Zing realized Carl had spent all of his money, he put his hand on Carl's shoulder and asked him to take his men home to catch the pig. Then it was the doorman's turn. Before leaving, Zing told him not to let Carl escape on the way. The guard nodded and pushed Carl out. He threatened Carl that if he tried to flee, he would cut off his legs and make him trudge home. "You deserve this because of being obsessed with the gambling," he said. When they arrived at the house gate, Carl refused to enter, instead telling them he would stand outside the gate and let them in to catch the pig. The doorman considered Carl's attitude and then agreed so as not to embarrass him. Carl looked at those men walking into the yard and quickly hid in the opposite corner. He didn't want to see his elderly mother sad. Hearing the screams of the doorman and the others in the yard, as well as his old mother's bitter pleas, he felt remorse and blamed himself. Finally, after witnessing those people beating the old mother and driving the pigs out, he couldn't return home and face the old mother again. Carl couldn't even remember how many times he vowed never to gamble again, but when he saw the blind old mother at home and thought about his behavior, he burst into tears. He dashed out of the village and came across a dilapidated house. He curled up in the wall's corner. It was getting dark by this time. Carl dozed off. Carl didn't know how long he'd been sleeping when he heard someone talking to him. A voice from behind a shattered wall asked him for fire to smoke. Carl dozed off. He didn't want to talk to that person. He said in a dream that he didn't smoke. Carl felt a chill as he turned to go back to sleep. The house was dilapidated and he was outside the village. It was late. How could anyone come here to lend him fire? Carl sensed that something was wrong when he heard voices outside the wall saying, "Let's go gambling." When these words were said, Carl suspected that this person was not normal. Before Carl could even raise his head to look, a figure appeared from beneath the crumbling wall. Carl was terrified when he looked at the man. The man's face was a large blood hole and he was getting close to Carl's face. Carl was so terrified that he peed his pants. His legs were weak. He wanted to run but couldn't get up. He could only sit on the ground panting for help, but couldn't speak. As the man stretched his head forward again, Carl noticed many sharp teeth emerging from the red hole on his face, which had no feature of a human face. He suggested gambling with Carl again. If Carl won, he would give him a large sum of money. If Carl lost, he would shave his face. A cold voice resounded, and Carl's heart was filled with fear. Carl was so terrified that he couldn't say no and could only nod his head in a cold sweat. When he saw Carl agree, he took out a few gold nuggets and placed them on the dirty wall, declaring that this was his bet. At the same time, he pulled out a mahjong set. After that, he placed the mahjong set on the filthy wall. Carl stared at the deck of cards in front of him, his heart racing, and he did not dare to reach out and take it for the first time. Following the drawing of the card, the man repeatedly urged Carl to draw the card quickly. Carl did not dare to resist, so he could only tremulously pull out his hand. Carl's body was shivering, holding two cards in his hand, but he didn't have the courage to look at them, so he just held them in his hand. The man appeared impatient, so he asked Carl to open the card. Despite his repeated urgings, Carl did not dare to open the cards and could only throw out two cards in his palm. When Carl closed his eyes and heard the man say that he got an earth card, he thought the game was over. He had never drawn a card larger than the ground card since he began playing this game. When Carl closed his eyes and covered his ears, he could hear the crunching sound of cards falling on the brick wall, similar to the sound of a life test. Immediately after Carl's card fell, he heard someone howl, "I really lost!" His words were filled with unbelievable tones, as if he couldn't lose. Carl reasoned that if his opponent lost a card, he would be ashamed to commit suicide, so he closed his eyes and waited for a long time, only hearing the wind whistling in his ears. Carl quietly opened his eyes, looked around and saw that the person had vanished. At this point, his heart seemed to be reviving. He thought he was having a dream, but when Carl turned around, he saw a deck of cards and some gold bars on the wall. Only then did he realize that the card he'd selected was the largest deck in mahjong, the Earth card. Carl couldn't hold back his tears as he realized God had saved his life and given him a second chance. Carl returned home with some gold nuggets. He never gambled again, sold the gold nuggets for startup capital, and Carl's family's life gradually improved. This story happened in Longan District, Huludao City, Liaoning Province on December 10, 2015. I was working at a harbor there at the time. My colleagues and I lived together in a dormitory not far from the harbor. There was an abandoned building next to our dormitory. One day, the three of us had a little drink after work. Yin, the bravest of the three, came up with the idea that we would explore the abandoned building. He said that the abandoned building used to be the office of a large company. Normally, we would object, but because we were drunk that day, the ghost somehow made the two of us follow Yin. But when we got there, we both regretted it. If the building looked somber during the day, it was even scarier at night. Another colleague of mine was Sam, who was not very big but very brave. Sam wanted us to go back, however, despite Yin's ridicule and irony that Sam was a coward, Sam still decided to continue, and I didn't have any opinions of my own. Although I was a little scared, I didn't fall far behind when the two of them were walking. After entering the abandoned building, we realized that there was indeed a fire before, and there were traces of smoke everywhere. It was very dark inside the house. We relied on the light from the mobile phone in Yin's hand to shine, looked at some of the rooms inside, but were quite disappointed. The rooms were empty. They seemed to have been cleaned up after the fire, but nothing was left. At this point, we decided to go out. Yin was thinking about something. He saw several houses in front of him that did not appear to be on fire. He also saw some items that were kept and asked to check them out. There were indeed some things in the rooms, but they were all shabby furniture. They hadn't been used in years. There was a smaller corridor in front of some rooms. We decided to go down that road. Sam convinced us to come back, but Yin ignored him, and Sam didn't dare to go out alone, so he had to follow. At the door of a room, Yin suddenly stopped as if something inside caught his attention. Sam and I followed Yin together and looked inside. We saw a person in the corner sleeping with a tattered duvet, looking like a homeless person. But slowly we all discovered something was wrong. The person didn't show any reaction, especially the bare feet with a dead grey color. Yin felt curious and wanted to go ahead and see if the person was alive or dead. "I'll see if the person is dead or not," Yin said. "Don't be so crazy," I tried to stop him. We both convinced Yin not to check that person because we might get in trouble, but Yin had a very stubborn character. The more we tried to stop him, the more he wanted to do it. Finally, he stepped forward and opened the tattered duvet. This moment made our hearts feel like jumping out because no one knew if it was a corpse or a living person. But as soon as the duvet was opened, we were all scared. It was a dead wanderer. The body was rotting. It could be seen that he had been dead for some time. His skin was dry and disfigured. Seeing the horrible appearance of the corpse, Sam went to the back and vomited in disgust. I also hid far away, not daring to look directly. But Yin was brave, not afraid at all, mocking us for cowardice. Not only did he not leave, he even ran to the corpse and asked Sam to take a photo of him with the corpse. At first, Sam disagreed, but seeing Yin's appearance as if he wouldn't leave, he didn't take a photo. Sam had no choice but to take a photo for him. Yin didn't stop, and he asked to take a few more pictures before leaving in the end. Yin was completely satisfied, and we hurried back to the dormitory. Honestly, when I arrived there, I wasn't so scared. But now that I knew there was a dead man in the building behind our dormitory, I was so scared. The way back became very scary. I always felt that there were ghosts following me. Fortunately, we all made it home safely. The thrilling adventure of the night had ended safely. After the horrible night last night, we all went to work as usual. At noon, Sam suddenly panicked and ran into my office with a panicked face. He said that Yin didn't come to work this morning. His phone was unreachable. Yin was keeping a piece of material that Sam was in urgent need of right now. Sam was very thoughtful, feeling that this must have been something to do with what happened last night. He asked me to go with him to the abandoned building. Ever since we saw the dead man last night, we had been terrified of this abandoned building. But I found Yin, and it was daytime, so we still dared to come here. Following memory, we followed the path we took last night and began to look for Yin. Honestly, I didn't know why. Even during the day, this building looked so dark and spooky. The two of us took the road that we went on last night. Soon we reached the dead wanderer room and we looked inside, trembling. We immediately saw the tattered duvet covering the dead, but we also realized that it was different from last night. The overhanging shape of the duvet obviously didn't cover one more person, and a bad premonition arose in both of us. Although Sam was very scared, he and Yin were both from the same hometown and knew each other before. He was worried about Yin, so he dared to remove the torn tattered duvet. But as soon as we opened it, we were both completely dumbfounded. Sure enough, Yin was already dead under the duvet. He died next to the rotting corpse of the wanderer. No one knew why Yin came here or how he died. Sam and I couldn't imagine anything anymore. Later, the police came to handle the body, and concluded that Yin died of sudden heart failure, but Sam and I understood that Yin's death stemmed from a lack of respect for the deceased. The story took place on July 21, 2010 in Taiwan in a commercial and residential building known as Sushi Tiansha. The fifth floor of this building was a nursing house for mildly mentally ill patients, while the remaining floors were apartments and offices. 7 days ago, an elderly woman named Lee, who was being treated in the hospital on the fifth floor, went missing, and her family searched for days but couldn't find her. That afternoon, an elderly man was returning to his apartment on the 7th floor of the Sushi Tiansha building. Because he had only one daughter and was married, the elderly man lived alone on the 7th floor. When the elevator doors opened, the old man entered to go upstairs as usual, but he discovered that it was occupied by an elderly woman, but she didn't exit. The old man didn't think much of it, despite the fact that it was strange. She became even more bizarre after entering because she did not press to select any floor. It could have been a confused woman or a mental patient on the 5th floor. The old man mused to himself as he pressed a button to the 7th floor where he wanted to go. The elderly man casually inquired of the woman, "What floor do you want to go to?" The woman replied in hushed tones that she wanted to go to the 6th floor. The old man easily assisted her in pressing the 6th floor. He assumed she was confused and had forgotten to press. As the elevator rose, the old woman said nothing and did not respond either, despite the fact that the old man asked a few questions. "The 6th floor has been vacant for many years and has been sold for many years. Are you the one who bought it?" Because the old man suspected she was a psycho, he paid no attention to her anymore. After a while, the elevator took the two of them to the 6th floor as the old woman had requested. However, the woman did not approach the elevator door, indicating that she did not intend to exit the elevator. The man returned to remind her not to miss the elevator again. "Aren't you going to the 6th floor? There, you have it." But this time the old man was taken aback. Something was wrong here. Behind him turned out to be empty and the woman vanished without a trace. There was only the old man in the elevator. Did she just vanish like this? This time terrified the old man. He had no idea what he was in for. Could it be that what he saw just now was a ghost? Just as the old man was becoming perplexed, the elevator door behind him slowly opened, indicating that something was abnormal. The old man looked back instinctively. He was also on the lookout for any unexpected situations that might arise. And the old man saw a dark figure rushing towards him. He had no idea what was going on. But as soon as he saw the figure clearly, he was terrified. He couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. It was an old woman with a hideous face, her skin rotting and revealing a grey color, and her body emitting a strong stench. The old lady with white eyes gaped at him with a cynical look. Her body was poured directly onto him, which terrified him. The old man collapsed to the ground in terror, and the woman also overpowered him. He was completely taken aback by what was happening. Wasn't this the old lady who just asked him to select the elevator button on the 6th floor? At the time, his reaction was perplexing. The old man had almost exhausted his remaining strength. From the other corner, the old woman's body was lying there, and he was leaning against the elevator's corner. He was terrified. But seeing the old woman's body lying on the ground, his legs were terrified and he couldn't stand up. However, he discovered another more terrible truth at this time. Because the old woman's body blocked the elevator door, preventing the elevator from running, with trembling hands he quickly took out his cell phone and dialed his daughter's number, pleading for assistance. However, the signal in the elevator was very poor. He didn't remember how many times he called, but it appeared that he was unable to obtain the signal. His daughter worked as an office worker for a foreign invested company at the time. She knew her father was in distress after receiving the call, so she immediately dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the police arrived at the Tiansha building where the old man was trapped and were attempting to help him. However, when the police and rescue teams arrived, they saw the situation at the scene and it was helpless because so many things were intertwined. The cops used the old man's daughter's cell phone to contact him and wanted to save him as soon as possible, and there was only one way to do so. That was drag the decomposing old woman into the elevator and restart the elevator. The old man shivered when he realized he'd have to pull that horrible corpse by himself, but there was no other option. He thought the ghost of the old woman was beside him, so he just had to move this horrible rotting corpse? He had no idea what to do. However, he was unable to move or leave. He didn't want to spend another second with this body because it was getting dark. When the night came, if he was still present to keep this corpse and remain this closed elevator, a ghost might appear at any time. With this in mind, the elderly man closed his eyes and dragged the body into the elevator. The elevator finally started running after dragging the body into the elevator room, but as soon as the door closed, this terrible old man and woman were trapped in the cramped elevator. Still haunted by the sticky sensation of the old woman's rotting corpse, he looked around and found it deafeningly quiet. The entire world seemed to have vanished, leaving only the old man to guard the terrifying corpse. The elevator went down for a few minutes, and the old man felt like he'd been there for a century. Finally, the elevator descended to the first floor where the old woman's body was being handled by the rescue team below, and the old man collapsed before stepping out of the elevator with the assistance of his daughter. An investigation revealed that the old woman's body was identical to Mr. Lee's, who went missing 7 days ago. The police obtained surveillance footage of the entire building and revealed information about the incident. On July 14, Miss Lee, an elderly woman receiving care at a nursing home on the 5th floor, ghostly pressed a button to enter the elevator on the 6th floor. Miss Lee stepped out of the elevator after it reached the 6th floor in case no one noticed. The 6th floor was formerly a dojo, abandoned for unknown reasons for many years, recently sold to a new owner, who didn't know why, never used the place, so it remained empty. However, because the owner was concerned about other people entering, he welded a small iron cage to the elevator position. Miss Lee discovered that the elevator door at the back was closed after exiting the elevator. Because of the gap in this cage, she couldn't squat or lie down. She could only stand like this, and no one noticed she was trapped there. Following the autopsy, she died of dehydration. Perhaps the old man's discovery of her body was proof that the spirit can guide the way.